This is Wild Nevadacast. I'm Dave Santina, and I have a feeling that if you're listening to this podcast, you probably go out and hike from time to time. And those of you who like to get outside for a good hike in the northern Nevada or California region, perhaps you've bought a hiking book as a suggestion guide, something to give you some ideas. And the chances are, if you did that, then the man sitting across from me probably wrote that book. This is Mike White, who has been a multiple-time guide on Wild Nevada, the television series, but also has written a ton of hiking books. How many books have you written, Mike?
Well, it depends on how you count it, but basically over 30.
That's a lot. That's impressive. Yeah. I'm kind of overwhelmed with that number, and I have the good fortune of having a signed copy of one of your books that you signed on the show for me while we were out at Ballardini Ranch Trails. This is 50 of the best strolls, walks, and hikes around Reno. Now, that was a couple years ago. I don't know. There may be a new edition out by now.
No, same old one.
Okay, well, keep in mind it's a collector's item. It's got your signature in it. To me, this writing an email can be daunting sometimes for me, and you've written over 30 books. How do you approach writing a book like this, because it's full of details that seems like it would take forever?
Well, the first thing you need to do is kind of familiarize yourself with the area from afar. So you gather all the materials that you can, maps, other books, whatever you can find, just to let you know what's out there.
Okay.
Then, of course, the fun part begins. You have to go out there.
Okay. So is everything you've written about from a personal experience?
Absolutely. The company that I first started working for, Wilderness Press, used to be based out of Berkeley, California, now in Alabama, Birmingham. So that has its own interesting aspects to it. But anyway, they insisted everything you write about, you have to have walked. So that was the way I started, and that's the way I continue. So
how do you approach it? It seems so daunting to do a guidebook for all of the trails, or at least a lot of the trails in a region. I mean, you start out with just this blank canvas. How do you decide where to go first?
Well, it's kind of like that old joke about how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. It's kind of, you do it one trail at a time.
Okay.
And so you kind of have to have an idea what you're getting into from the very beginning, just so you have some sort of a timeline. How long is it going to take me to do all these? Like when I did the hiking guide to Sequoia and Kings Canyon and the surrounding wilderness areas, that's a lot of trail miles. That's a lot of trails. That's a lot of backcountry. That's a lot of driving. It's a lot of a lot.
Yeah.
And so it took me 3 seasons to get all that trail work done.
Seasons as in spring, summer, fall?
Well, mainly summer, but they did have some lower trails what you could do in spring, and then also some trails that were snow-free through part of the fall. So I'd say over a 4 to 5 month period of time.
Wow.
Now, if I wasn't married and I didn't have kids, that probably would have taken me a lot less time, but I wanted to stay married and stay with my kids. So I had to parcel it out a little bit.
So, okay. So then you're walking the trail, and do you carry a notebook? How do you make notes about what you're experiencing?
Well, way back when, I had a little micro cassette recorder that I would talk into.
Okay.
And then when smartphones came out, then I just dictated into my smartphone, my iPhone.
So then that translates into from phone to paper, or to virtual paper, I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, when I had the cassette, it was not as easy to replay and go forward and go back as an iPhone is. So I would transcribe all my notes onto paper.
Oh, wow.
But with the iPhone, that made it a lot easier to do.
Yeah. So when you start a book from scratch, I mean, I realize they're not all the same length because you're different regions that you're covering, but what's the timeline from start to delivery? I guess you're not finished until they publish it.
Right. I mean, from the time that you've submitted your manuscript, which, things are pretty much all done except for edits and all that stuff.
Okay.
It was, I think it's faster now, but back in the day, it used to take about a year
Oof, that's a daunting task, but fun. I mean, it sounds like it would be a really fun year. And then it makes me immediately think: when you're out writing, are you sort of staked by the publisher in advance? Do they give you some? Do you have some kind of advance money to survive on while you're doing the work?
Well, you can do it either way. And since we weren't dependent upon my income writing books, which I don't know how many people make a living writing books, unless your name is, one of these big time authors.
You're Stephen King,
yeah,
maybe?
Right, exactly. So I always deferred my payments to royalties. So
nice.
they would come in and as we sold the books. Rather than get a big lump sum, you blow it all, and then you think, "Oh, why did I do that?"
That's interesting. So that was the. I mean, did you do that most of the time with these?
I think I caught on pretty early that was the way to go.
Okay, so they sold well enough to make it the better choice.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well,
I would never have known.
I think it was the better choice, not due to sales, but just by my lack of discipline. I would have spent all the money earlier.
Fair enough. Now that I think about it, I probably would have done the same thing. Okay, so what was your first one?
The first one I ever did was a guidebook to the Trinity Alps. I picked up the contract from Luther Linkhart. He was a previous author, and he had developed some. I think it was Parkinson's or some debilitating disease like that towards the later stages of his life, and just was not able to hike anymore. And so they needed to find somebody else to take over that project, and I was the fortunate one to get selected.
Okay, and then apparently they liked what you did and brought you back for more.
Yeah, I had to go down to the Santa Cruz Mountains and walk a trail and then write it up as if I was writing a trail description, submit that, and then if they approved it, then they would consider me for the position.
Okay, so I've never written about a trail. I'm trying to think now whether I have the vocabulary to avoid repetition. How do you do it?
Well, what got me started doing this was way back when I was a teenager. I can remember my first guidebook that I picked up off a shelf. And it just was a gateway to exploration for me. It says all this stuff that I didn't even know was out there, as I got more mobile and shifted from riding my bicycle everywhere to riding in a car. And then my field got a lot bigger, and I wanted to know what's out there. Where do you go? What can you see?
Yeah.
So it was 100 Oregon hikes, written by Don and Roberta Lowe back in the late 60s probably. And so I just started voraciously reading about all these trails in Oregon. Then when I went to college in Seattle, I picked up the guidebooks that were specific to that area that the Mountaineers published, did the same thing. So well before I started actually writing, I think I had that stuff ingrained, that style and, how it works and ingrained into my psyche. So it was not a hard transition.
Nice. Had you considered doing this before you actually did it? Was it a thing you had sort of a fantasy?
I mean, I didn't even know it was a real possibility. I figured, all the guidebooks had been written. There's no opportunities for anything new.
You figure everything's covered by now.
Yeah,
right?
But it wasn't. And back in the day when guidebooks were much more popular than they are today, there were still lots of gaps in the coverage of places. And so most of the major, areas around major cities like Seattle, Portland, Southern California, Bay Area, those things have been covered, but there was a lot of stuff in between that just hadn't been covered or was needful to do an update. It'd been, 5 years since it was written, and maybe there were some changes, and so they would send people back out to check on what had already been done, maybe to add some things, spruce it up somehow, or put a new twist on it or whatever. So there was plenty of work back in the day for somebody like me.
So you described how you started, but the path you took before that was not necessarily what you would assume, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. My wife and I met in Seattle at college, and she got in. She was from Montana. She got into medical school here at the University of Nevada because Montana didn't have a medical school, and so they placed some of their residents in other Western state institutions. So we were coming to Reno, and all we knew was that her start date in August, and we moved lock, stock, and barrel down here as newlyweds with hardly anything. Drove our Volkswagen Beetle into the back of a U-Haul truck,
Wow.
pushed the rest of our pitiful belongings in around it, and drove off. No idea how we were going to get that Volkswagen out of the truck when we got here.
Oh, wow.
So that's a story in and of itself. But anyway, so my dad was a structural engineer in Portland, and I had worked in his same office as a draftsman. So I had that skill. And so when we arrived here in 1976, we needed a job, we needed a place to live. So I sent out resumes, ended up working in one of the casinos for 6 weeks until something else showed up.
Like a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, and that was not the best job I had in my life.
I understand.
That's all I'll say, so I don't get myself in trouble.
Right, yeah.
But I finally ended up at SEA Engineers, and after a few years became the department head for the drafting and graphics department. Stayed there for 15 years until 1991. And at that point, we had 2 young boys. They had excellent child care from an older lady who was kind of not a relational grandma, but acted just the same. So it was fantastic. But they were getting older. They were kind of outgrowing that situation. My wife had started a pediatric practice, loving what she was doing. I kind of had my job wired. I felt like I could put a cardboard cutout of myself in my office and everything would have run fine for several months before they realized I wasn't really there. So I needed a new challenge to more or less stay out of trouble because, if I get bored, I have a tendency to get into various kinds of trouble.
Oh, I see.
So, and the boys needed, a different childcare situation. So I thought, well, I've always loved to write. Let's see if I can make this work. And so I decided to stay home. And then after a few months, the gig with Wilderness Press showed up, and kind of the rest is history.
That's pretty cool. So it worked out really well. Did you write other kinds of did you do other kinds of writing before you got into doing these books, or was it this from the beginning?
Well, it was kind of interesting because we have a big anniversary coming up, and so there's a big party. Our daughter-in-law wants to get a bunch of pictures and put them together and stuff. So we went through our old college yearbooks, and in the middle of one of them, I found a strip of newsprint of a letter that I had written to the editor and of our school paper, which was not a big deal necessarily.
Right.
The circulation was maybe 2,000.
Sure.
But I read that and I thought, oh my goodness, I was a very idealistic young man at that point in life. And I had also written, when I was living at home in Portland before college, a letter to the editor of the local Oregonian newspaper that got printed.
Okay.
My mom was very proud. It's about the Vietnam War and why we shouldn't be there. And so there's these little, glimpses in the past. Well, actually, the only reason I got through college was I could write. If I could do term papers and take essays, I was fine. Anything else? I would like to say I was a B- student, but that might be an exaggeration.
So your writing skill carried you through school.
Yes.
So it was there all the time.
Right.
Just waiting to be unleashed.
Right. But I didn't have a lot of self-confidence at that point in my life. I never even considered, should I follow this passion or just,
That's tough. That's a tough thing to launch into. You know, you're risking, even if you don't have a lot, it feels risky, I think.
Yes.
So that makes sense. I understand that. My wife's a writer, and before she took the step into becoming sort of a freelance business of one, there was some soul searching and some gnashing of teeth and flailing of hands.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it worked out. But that is there's a moment where you finally are willing to take it, and it helps to have support, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you've written about all over this region, mostly Western states, right?
Yeah.
And I see a lot of California, Nevada. Anything? What are your strong memories about locations that you really enjoyed experiencing?
Well, I mean, there's been so many.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had to put a mileage on how many miles I walked, it would probably be some ridiculous number.
If only there was a Fitbit back then.
Yeah.
You would know exactly how many steps.
I would. Probably better I don't know. But, a lot of people ask me, oh, what's your favorite trail? And I thought, well, geesh, I don't know. I should have an answer to that because that's a very obvious question.
But maybe this isn't fair to make assumptions. I occasionally get asked, what is your favorite fill in the blank because of the Wild Nevada TV series. And it changes. The answer changes depending on the day and my feeling that day and what's on my mind.
Right.
And, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's not an easy answer.
Yeah. I mean, most of the stuff I've done has been mountain based. And I love the mountains. Summer's my favorite season. Means I get to go to the mountains.
Me too.
And so that's my heart and soul. But some of the trips that I remember were ones that were not in the mountains, probably because they were more unique, like the Lost Coast Trail in Northern California, or Rim to Rim, or the Tonto Trail in the Grand Canyon, or stuff like that. So I mean, there's so much other stuff. That I guess it kind of depends on what mood you're in, which is you think is the best, and
right.
So but I've rarely been on an assignment where I came home disappointed in what I saw.
It's a pretty good life.
Yeah. I mean, a few trails didn't make it into whatever book project I was writing just because they weren't bad. They just weren't, up to par.
Okay.
But there was always something once you're outside and in nature that you can take away as being positive from your experience. So it's all good, as they say.
Okay. You made me think of a question. What does a trail need in order for you to find it worthy of inclusion? Like, what do you need to know, or what do you need to see in order to consider it for a book?
Well, it's first of all, I would guess it needs to be a decent trail. If it's something that nobody's maintained for 30 years and it's falling apart and stuff like that,
right.
Then it's easy to say, okay, this doesn't cut it.
If somebody's going to get injured just walking along it or trying to make
right.
their way through it,
or they can't find out where the hell they're going,
right, right.
Where's the trail? Where is it? Which way does it go? That's
too secretive.
Yeah, that's usually a good sign that you don't want to send people out on this thing.
Right.
But like I said, I think just about any trail, whether you're in forest all the way and never see a view, or, if you're walking along a creek and, or going to a lake. I mean, there's just so much out in the natural world that is worthwhile to be experiencing as a journey or something as a destination. So
that question comes to my mind because there's a trail that's near where I live, and it's not official. There's no signage. You wouldn't know that it even is considered a trail. It's just like a bike, a single track, or even a game trail where like it could be animals walking on it. But it is a trail, and I learned the name of it because of one of your books.
Oh,
and so. It made me think about where the line is, because that, although it is now I recognize it is a recognized trail and people come there all the time, it doesn't immediately feel like something that you would want to walk off on because it goes off into the desert and who knows what's out there. But it does have another end at a park in Sparks, which is a beautiful 3+ mile hike. If you can start on one end and go to the other, and it's a really nice experience. But I had no idea. So I think about these places where there are trails that go off, but if you don't know enough about it, I wouldn't trust wandering off on that trail if I hadn't read this book telling me, oh yeah, this is the trailhead, and you can go this direction, and you can turn here, and you can go this many miles, and then turn here, and then you're going to end up over at this other safe spot. So
Right.
Suddenly it empowers you. So the books, they empower people, I think, to try some of these areas that you might not immediately just take off with confidence. And so I think that's one of the values of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm more like one of those people who would see that trail, unknown trail, and say, I wonder where that goes.
Right.
And I'd go find out.
Yeah.
But not everybody wants to be that big of a risk taker. And so I think that's one of the comforting aspects of trail guides is somebody's already been there before you. You're not going into the unknown. It's might still be a little, off-putting at times, but somebody's been there and came out the other side alive.
Lived to tell and write about it.
Yeah.
So it's a lot safer. I think that's important. We did a couple episodes with you. The book that you signed, we were at Ballardini Ranch. We had done that one, and before that, we did a family episode with my wife and my daughter, where you took us on a small trail at Galena Creek Regional Park, which was a great introduction to kids, and one that I have returned to a couple of times with other families because it's such a perfect introduction.
It is a good trail for little ones.
And then the Ballardini Ranch we did a couple of years later, I think. And as we were recording that hike on that trail, you pointed out that up on the hill there was a new trail being cut, even as we stood there looking at it. And I wonder about that. Is that something that you see a lot? Is there always new trail being cut somewhere? And how do you incorporate that into something like a guidebook, or do you get to do revisions or additions to incorporate that kind of stuff?
If the book, it depends on who you work for. Like I've written for Wilderness Press and some other presses that are more commercial oriented. Okay. And I've also worked for University of Nevada and University of Utah presses who, they're not as necessarily, I'm sure they would like to make money, but that's not their main motivation. They're trying to preserve, something of value. And so that will oftentimes allow you to do different things because of that. So, but the Ballardini Trail that you bring up, just the other day, I was up on Jones Creek Trail, or actually, no, I was doing the Dry Pond Loop. And you can start out either at the Whites Creek or the Thomas Creek Trailhead. I had parked at Thomas Creek Trailhead, and I noticed there was a new sign that was off to the north side of the parking lot. So I walked over there, and it was called the Sierra Front Trail. Oh. And that's that trail that connects to Ballardini.
Okay.
I haven't hiked it yet, but it zigzags up the hill and then kind of just makes a rising traverse across the front of the Sierra there and ends up at Thomas Creek. So I want to do it.
Yeah. Well, at some point it's got to feel nice to see something new to walk on, because if you've written about all these trails in this area, none of it's new to you until they cut something else.
Right. And we are very fortunate to be where we are because trails are being added to the system all the time. A lot of them are inspired by mountain biking clubs. We see that not only in the Truckee Meadows, but up in the Mount Rose area and all around Lake Tahoe. So there always seems to be new additions to the trail network in our locality here. That's not the same for everywhere. And in fact, if you talk to most trail experts, they'll tell you that we're losing trails rather than gaining them in a lot of places. So we should all feel pretty good here where we are about trails in northern Nevada and northern California.
I think it's one of the reasons why people like living here and want to move here in some cases is that outdoor lifestyle and those opportunities and the support that the community and the entities, the cities, the county provide. They really want to help continue that. So that's part of the culture here. I think that means that it should continue. That's pretty exciting. A few years ago, I wanted to tell this story because I still find it amusing. We met you in 2017. A few years before that, I got an email from a publisher, I think it might have been Wilderness Press, saying, "Hey, we got a hiking book. We would like to get you to write a blurb, you and Chris Orr to write a blurb about it, and we could put it on the back. Would you do it?" And I thought, how cool is that we could have our names on the back of a book? Let's do it. So we both wrote an epic poem each, I think, and turned it in, and they said, "Thank you so very much for this submission. Do you mind if we edit it slightly?" And so, of course, we are happy to have our names on the book. We didn't really have anything to say about it other than, of course, edit if you need to. And so we wrote 2 paragraphs, and what we got back is what made it onto the back of this book. And it says on the back of A Foot and a Field, Reno, Tahoe, "This book is perfect for both visitors and residents. It makes us eager to revisit our favorite trails and explore new ones. Dave Santina and Chris Orr, co-hosts Wild Nevada PBS." Now, I'm pretty sure neither of us wrote one word of that, but our names are under it, and so it's cool because we're on the back of this book. And that book was written by none other than Mike White, who we did not know at all, and we had no idea who you were. And then years later, we meet you to go do a segment, and I'm realizing, hey, that's the guy whose book we wrote our blurbs for and got our names on it. And recently, I was at a bookstore, and I slid over to the Nevada section, and I saw a new edition out. And then I thought, oh, I'm sure they took us off the back. And I took a look at it, and we're still there. We're still on the back of that book. So thank you, Mike White, for giving us a chance to get our names in print on a book cover. It's the back cover, but, I think that's about as good as I'm going to ever do.
Well, it must have been a good quote if it made it through 2 editions.
Well, they were very happy with what they wrote representing us.
That's hilarious.
I'm holding paper books in front of me here, and next to it is my phone, where I imagine most people go these days for instructions, directions, and maps. Is there any future for these kinds of guidebooks? Are they being digitized? How are people using them these days?
Well, that's an interesting story. You probably can figure it out that I think guidebook sales as a whole are down over what they were previously. People nowadays, because of the internet and the technology, they don't feel like they need to pay for information.
Yeah, that's true.
They think it should be everybody's right to have whatever information is out there. So, and to a certain extent, I would agree with that. But to the extent of what we typically will write in a guidebook, it's so much more information than what you're going to get on an app. I've used some of those apps and have been incredibly frustrated with them.
Yeah.
But maybe in some regards, it's better for people who are more adventurous to not have all that information and kind of find out what's out there as they go. Maybe that harkens back to an era of explorers. I don't know, but
it's a fair point. But I would say that I would feel a lot more comfortable if when I'm out somewhere with possibly without cell service, if I've got this book in my backpack that I can reference that has a map and some descriptions and can help me get back where I need to get, I find that to be a very high level endorsement for the continuation of guidebooks and for everybody to have one with them when they go out. I think that's a pretty good argument. Yeah, no, and I would agree 100%. I'll give you a little story that maybe illustrates that. Now that I'm in my 7th century, I'm still backpacking, still love to do it, still can do it. So I'm trying to do it as much as possible. And we've got a group of
4 or 5 guys. We do the old guys backpack at least once a year. So last year we were over in the Marble Mountains, which is in Northern California, north of the Trinity Alps. If you know where Wairika is, that's kind of the closest town.
I do.
And we were doing this loop trip. I had done it twice before. I'd written the first description for an edition of Backpacking California, and then we updated that a few years ago. So I was familiar with this route, had hiked it twice before. So it's like a 4 or 5 day trip. Well, on the last day, you cross this ridge, and then you get into this very expansive, wet meadow where there's cattle grazing allowed. And there's little to no maintenance done on the trails. And it's very wet in spots. And so trying to follow the trail, we lost it.
Okay.
And
That's scary.
We went up, we went down, we went back, we went forward, we went all around.
And no trail.
Could not find this trail.
Ooh.
I, of course, had my USGS 7.5 minute topo map with me. And I could see where the trail was supposed to be. But we went to that vicinity, no trail. So we ended up having to just thrash our way out of this place.
Oof.
And so we got to a spot where I could, there were some known landmarks. So I could figure out, okay, we were right here.
Okay.
And I got my compass out, my old-fashioned compass, and took a bearing and said, see that peak over there? We need to go just a little bit to the right of that, the straight line. Well, it was down a very steep gorge, brushy, rocky. Well, 2 guys that were with me weren't real pleased with me at this point in time.
Hey, we're the old guys, remember? What are you doing to me?
They were quite miffed. But if we only had, unfortunately, it was only a mile that we had to go. And so we went down, we kept going down. They slipped numerous times. Everybody except me got cuts and scratches and bruises and heard a lot of curse words and the whole 9 yards. Well, we get down to the bottom of the valley, and just as before we get to the creek, we hit the road, we walk 100 feet, and there's our car.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So I was a rock star at that point.
From zero to hero.
Yeah, exactly.
In only a moment.
Here's the catch, though. So I didn't take my trail description with me. Usually I'll copy it and have it on a piece of paper and whatever.
Okay.
I didn't do that. I said, I know. I've been here twice.
Been there twice, yeah.
Yeah, I know where to go. So I went, when I got home, I reread my description. And in the description for that part of the trip, it says, the USGS map shows this trail in this location, but it's not there. You need to go, X number of feet in a different direction and look for this, and you'll find the trail again.
You already knew it. And then you forgot. So there you go.
So that would have been very helpful to have had the guidebook.
What
or at least,
better, what better endorsement than that? Mike White endorses Mike White. Well, I endorse your books for sure. I really think they're valuable, and I'm so glad that you were able to come and talk about it a little bit. I find it fascinating, and I've got 2 in front of me. I'll be buying more as time goes by, because I really appreciate and enjoy them. And thank you for coming in and giving me the time today.
That's my pleasure.
All right. So I want to remind everybody to watch Wild Nevada on PBS Reno via broadcast or on pbsreno.org or by the YouTube channel, or of course on the PBS app. Now, if you have a question about Wild Nevada or comment or a suggestion, please send them to me. It's podcasts@pbsreno.org. I'd love to hear what you think about the podcast, about the Wild Nevada series. Give us ideas, places to go, things to do. Tell us what you think. And my thanks to Mike White, and I thank you for listening to Wild Nevadacast.